Good evening. Thank you. I am Horace Anderson. I'm Dean of the Elisabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University, and I am pleased to welcome you to the presentation of the 2024 Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy. This evening's ceremony is taking place here at Pace University in New York City, and we are joined as well by environmental law advocates and supporters virtually from around the world. As you can see here on the screen, our online attendees have joined us from 5 continents and more than 25 countries, all here to celebrate the remarkable achievements of our laureates. Singapore's Ambassador for International Law, Rena, and Senior High Seas Advisor for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, Kristina Gjerde. Now, this map is apropos of this evening's event, of our laureates' work, and of the panel discussion we're going to have later. You can see much of what's on screen is water. Water, as you all know, covers 70% of the Earth's surface, and a lot of it is outside of the sovereignty of all of those land masses and the countries that sit on them. These vast oceans are what connect us all, and their health is crucial not only to each of us individually, but also to the future of our planet. In an era of unprecedented marine heat waves and controversy over deep sea excavation, the Elisabeth Haub School of Law is proud to honor our distinguished laureates for their leadership in negotiating the world's first legal agreement to protect biodiversity of the high seas. Ambassador Lee and Professor Gjerde have received the prestigious Haub Award in recognition of their unwavering commitment to ocean conservation and their instrumental roles in advancing the 2023 UN Agreement on Biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. Their diplomatic leadership has provided a much-needed environmental legal framework for the high seas and a new focus for safeguarding the ocean's resources. Tonight, we look forward to a panel discussion with our laureates, delving deeper into their work. They will be joined by a leading authority on the subject, Dr. David Freestone, Executive Director of the Sargasso Sea Commission and visiting scholar from George Washington University Law School. Unfortunately, Professor Nicholas Robinson is unable to be with us this evening, but filling his role as moderator of the panel, and ably, I will predict, will be Professor Smita Narula, Haub Distinguished Professor of International Law and co-director of the Global Center for International Legal Studies. This year marks the 45th anniversary of what is now known as the Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy. With the support of the Haub family, in 2016, the award was dedicated in honor of Elisabeth Haub, a noted philanthropist and advocate for strong laws for the conservation of nature. And this award is today considered the world's most prestigious award in the field of environmental law. Chosen annually by an esteemed jury, the Haub Award recognizes the innovation, skill, and accomplishments of lawyers, diplomats, international civil servants, and other advocates who work to create the world environmental order. We are grateful to Pace University trustee Liliane Haub, granddaughter of Elisabeth Haub, who is also a member of the Haub Award jury and has been instrumental in championing its cause. Tonight, we are honored to have with us her daughter, Mary Lee Haub, to confer the 2024 award. Now, Mary Lee is the sixth generation of her family to play a role in advancing environmental and sustainability issues, and so thrilled to welcome you here today. I also want to acknowledge and thank our faculty and members of the jury from across the world who join us this evening in person and online. We thank you for volunteering your time and expertise to recognize exceptional accomplishments in the field of environmental law and diplomacy. It's now my pleasure to introduce President Marvin Krisloff. I warned you, I let you know what was coming, so be ready. President Marvin Krisloff, a lawyer by training, who is deeply committed to the work of Haub Law's top-ranked and internationally renowned environmental law program. I'll now turn the presentation over to President Krisloff.
Well, I have to follow up on that introduction with a rousing good evening. Hello to everybody online. I was so excited to see that map. Congratulations to our team. I've never seen that before. I just came from India, and I think there were a few people watching from India, and I know Ambassador Lee's family is watching from Singapore, which is really wonderful, and probably a lot of other people around the world as well. And that really does speak to the impact of this award and particularly the work of our awardees. It is really my honor to welcome you to this year's Haub Award ceremony, which is a wonderful event that underscores our commitment to environmental leadership and global impact. We are proud to serve as the stewards of the Haub Medal, one of the most significant awards for environmental law and diplomacy. This award exemplifies our ongoing mission to champion excellence and innovation in the legal profession, particularly in the crucial area of environmental law. The law school, the Haub Law School, is known for so many things. We train committed and engaged lawyers who are prepared to make an impact from the very start of their careers. Our path to practice curriculum ensures that our graduates emerge as effective advocates, equipped with both the practical skills and ethical foundation needed to succeed in their lives. And our students get real-world experience through our clinics, allowing them to contribute to their communities even before they graduate, which is something we value so deeply. But more than anything else, Elisabeth Haub School of Law is renowned for its excellence in and dedication to the field of environmental law. And of course, even though Nick Robinson isn't with us tonight here, he is with us in spirit because Nick is very much at the center of that commitment. It is through his work and the work of our wonderful faculty that has sustained this over the many years that we are able to lead not only in educating the next generation, but in also driving the global conversation. Our partnership with the Haub family has been critical to the growth of our institution and the advancement of environmental law as a field. Thank you to the Haub family and for its unwavering commitment to environmental advocacy. We are privileged to continue that partnership tonight with Mary Lee Haub, who represents the next generation of the family's legacy. This year, we are pleased to honor two extraordinary individuals, Ambassador Rena Lee and Professor Kristina Maria Gjerde. Both have made remarkable contributions to ocean conservation and international law, playing key roles in the advancement of the 2023 UN Agreement on Biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. Their work not only reflects the values we champion at PACE, but also highlights the power of international cooperation in addressing critical environmental challenges. We are so proud to have this opportunity to recognize these leaders and to support global efforts to protect our planet's oceans and biodiversity. Now it is my great privilege to introduce Professor Ashinte Vitanage, a professor of law for designated service in environmental law and the Associate Director for Environmental Law Programs at the Elisabeth Haub School of Law here, where she teaches international environmental law. Her work often goes into international oceans law, and she's a contributing author to one of our distinguished panelists, David Freestone's forthcoming co-edited book on the BBNJ Treaty, which will be the first authoritative commentary and analysis of this international agreement. Professor Vitanage will have the honor of introducing our esteemed laureates today. Thank you all for being here as we celebrate the leaders who continue to inspire us with their dedication and commitment to the environment.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, President Krislov, and also Dean Anderson for your lovely comments earlier on. Greetings and a warm welcome to you all, especially and also those who are online as well. So the high seas, the vast stretches of the ocean that lie outside national control, long considered sometimes a lawless frontier, are vital to the health of this planet. Yet, they have historically been neglected in terms of governance and protection. The two laureates whom we honor today were both instrumental in bringing about an international agreement that seeks to address this very gap in international environmental law. Now, that agreement was the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction BBNJ Agreement, also known as the High Seas Biodiversity Treaty. It is a historic agreement adopted in 2023 under the auspices of the United Nations that marks the culmination of nearly 2 decades of discussions and negotiations. It addresses the protection and sustainable use of marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction by providing for the establishment of marine protected areas on the high seas that are large scale in nature, the assessment of economic activities on the high seas, and of course their potential impact on biodiversity, as well as the equitable sharing of the many ecological, cultural, and scientific benefits of the high seas. Now, the BBNJ Treaty represents a significant milestone for international environmental law. I now have the distinct honor of introducing our two distinguished laureates, Ambassador Rena, Singapore's Ambassador for International Law, and Professor Kristina Gjerde, Senior High Seas Advisor to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and an adjunct faculty member at Middlesbrough Institute of International Studies. So I begin with Ambassador Rena of Singapore, who is a highly respected diplomat with an illustrious career in international law, multilateral negotiations, and environmental diplomacy. Her public service career spans over 3 decades in various roles in the Singaporean government, including roles at the Attorney General's Chambers, the Ministry of Defense, and as the Chief Executive of the Intellectual Property Office of Singapore. She has significant expertise over a wide range of international law matters, including the law of the sea, climate change, and environmental law. She was appointed as Singapore's Ambassador for International Law in 2023, and prior to that, served as Singapore's Ambassador for Oceans and Law of the Sea Issues, and Special Envoy of the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Now, in so doing, she played a vital role in addressing global challenges related to the marine environment, but also maritime security and sustainable development. Her legal expertise and deep commitment to environmental conservation placed her at the forefront of some of the most pressing issues concerning the health of our oceans. Now, Ambassador Lee receives this award for her leadership in serving as the President of the United Nations Intergovernmental Conference on the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Marine Biological Diversity of Areas Beyond National Jurisdiction. It is a mouthful. Now, this is where she presided over complex negotiations for over 5 years. Together, with the assistance of the United Nations Division for Ocean Affairs and the Law of the Sea, Ambassador Lee led negotiations focused on establishing mechanisms for those marine protected areas, environmental impact assessments, and the fair sharing of marine genetic resources. Ambassador Lee's steady leadership, diplomacy, and legal acumen were instrumental in overcoming the complex geopolitical and legal hurdles involved in these negotiations. With calm dignity, determination, and grace, she managed to bring together a wide range of stakeholders, including nations with very divergent interests, non-governmental organizations, and scientific communities, around a common vision of sustainable ocean governance. Now, for those who are ardently following the BBNJ negotiations, you will recall that moment when thunderous applause and cheers erupted from those attending the historic meeting of spring 2023, when after nearly 40 hours of arduous negotiations, Ambassador Lee announced these very iconic words: "The ship has reached the shore." Now, beyond her work on the High Seas Treaty, Ambassador Lee has made significant contributions to various other international platforms, such as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, including serving as a member of the International Seabed Authority's Legal and Technical Commission. Her legacy is now poised for even greater heights, with her most recent nomination by the Republic of Singapore's National Group to the Permanent Court of Arbitration, with full support from the Singaporean government, for election as a judge for the International Court of Justice in 2026. So given this trajectory of accomplishments, it should not surprise you at all that Ambassador Lee was recently named Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People in 2024. Now, yet, Ambassador Lee would not have us end on this image, but rather on this one. This is an image of the BB&J family, some of whom are in this audience, a team that worked tirelessly towards the agreement's fruition. During her remarks at the reception to celebrate the adoption of the BB&J agreement on 19 June 2023, Ambassador Lee echoed these sentiments when she said, "Many of you have come up to me to congratulate me. That makes me feel like such a fraud because it is not me. It is not what I have done. It is what all of you, each and every one of you have done to bring us to this point. True leaders are those who elevate their team, nurturing, supporting, and celebrating their accomplishments. And you, Ambassador Lee, are a true leader. So congratulations to you and your family. BB&J family, I mean, as well." Now let me turn to our other distinguished laureate. So Professor Kristina Maria Gjerde is a renowned expert in ocean governance and international law. Her work at the intersection of law, science, and policy has made her one of the foremost voices on ocean conservation. A graduate of the NYU Law School with a focus on comparative international law, Professor Gjerde entered the legal profession practicing admiralty law for several years in a New York City law firm. She later served as a research fellow at the Marine Policy Center of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, then as a research fellow and guest lecturer at the University of Hull Law School in the UK, and represented the World Wildlife Fund at the International Maritime Organization in London. And so began her nearly 30 years of dedicated work on the progressive development of public international law relating to the marine environment. Since 2003, having been awarded a 3-year Pew Fellowship in Marine Conservation, Professor Gjerde's work took on a greater focus on high seas and deep seabed governance. So around that same time, she also assumed a position as a senior high seas advisor to the International Union for Conservation of Nature's Global Marine and Polar Program. As a lawyer and policy advisor, she has dedicated her career to advancing international frameworks that conserve our oceans for generations to come. And of course, one of her most significant contributions is her leadership and advocacy surrounding the High Seas Biodiversity Treaty. Professor Gjerde was a driving force behind the global movement to develop an international legal framework to address this issue. She was working closely with governments, scientific communities, NGOs, and international organizations to build consensus and raise awareness about the importance of protecting marine biodiversity. As an advisor to the IUCN and a member of various working groups at the United Nations, she helped shape the policies and key provisions of the BB&J Treaty. One of her key contributions to the treaty negotiations was advocating for the establishment of marine protected areas in the high seas. These protected areas are critical for conserving ecosystems, preventing overfishing, and allowing marine species to thrive. She also worked on provisions related to environmental impact assessments, ensuring that activities on the high seas, such as fishing, mining, and shipping, are subject to scrutiny to minimize harm to fragile ecosystems. Additionally, Professor Gjerde championed the equitable sharing of marine genetic resources, ensuring that those benefits derived from the rich biodiversity of the high seas are shared fairly, particularly with developing nations. Her expertise in international law, coupled with deep commitment to fairness and sustainability, was instrumental in shaping the very provisions that we have today. Unsurprisingly, Professor Gjerde's contributions extend far beyond the BB&J negotiations. To advance science-based progress, she co-founded and currently serves on the boards of 4 initiatives: the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, the Global Ocean Biodiversity Initiative, the Sargasso Sea Project, and the High Seas Alliance. She has authored or co-authored over 150 publications, many with leading ocean scientists. And her recent published works delve into topics as diverse scientific and legal consideration for dynamic management of the high seas, the consideration of midwater ecosystems when evaluating the environmental risks of deep seabed mining, and the relationship between the BB&J Agreement and the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And as these pictures show, she is a sought-after speaker, often presenting on various ocean-related topics at a wide range of international conferences and fora. So throughout her extensive career, Professor Gjerde has been at the forefront of efforts to protect marine environments, advising international bodies such as the European Commission and the United Nations, and contributing to major international agreements like the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and the Convention on Biological Diversity. So in recognition of her pioneering work, Professor Gjerde has been a mentor and collaborator for countless organizations and policymakers who are engaged in the global effort to safeguard our oceans. In 2018, she received the Visionary Ocean Award, an award given by Boat International in partnership with the Blue Marine Foundation to recognize those who have shown exceptional commitment to issues facing the ocean. She continues to inspire a new generation of conservationists and policymakers as an adjunct professor at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, California, where she teaches a very intensive course, I've heard, on international marine law. To end, we return to where it all began for Professor Gjerde. In a 2020 interview, she described her transition from practicing international shipping to marine biodiversity protection rather candidly. She said, "My first scuba dive in Palau made me realize I'd rather defend the fish and the corals than the ships." Since then, she has remained a passionate and tireless advocate for the protection of marine biodiversity, and we are all the more grateful for it. So congratulations to you, Professor Gjerde, for your years of service to this course. The applause came a tad early. Ladies and gentlemen, the leadership of our laureates in the successful creation of the High Seas Biodiversity Treaty is testament to their lifelong commitment to the protection of our planet's most vital and least understood ecosystems, and their shared vision for a sustainable ocean future. So with our utmost gratitude and heartfelt congratulations, let me now invite Marie-Lee Haub, who is representing the family of Elisabeth Haub today, to officially confer the award. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. It is such an honor to join you today as we celebrate two extraordinary women whose tireless work and dedication have shaped the future of our oceans and planet. The Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy means a great deal to my family. For the past 45 years, this award has recognized the innovation, skill, and accomplishments for those who work to sustain and strengthen the world environmental order. There really is no better tribute to the legacy of my great-grandmother, Elisabeth Haub, whose life work was focused on advancing the sound stewardship and sustainable development of natural resources. By honoring today's champions of environmental law and diplomacy, we carry forward her passion and vision for a more sustainable world. To me, this award is not just a celebration of excellence in environmental diplomacy. It is a torch passed down through the generations, a reminder that our actions today will define the world that we leave behind for others. As someone representing a new generation of environmental advocates, I am particularly inspired by the contributions of Ambassador Rena and Kristina Maria Gjerde. Their deep commitment to bold diplomacy and skilled international cooperation have resulted in groundbreaking global agreements and policies that safeguard our oceans. Their efforts have set a powerful precedent for the kind of international collaboration needed to address the immense environmental challenges of our time. It is profoundly moving to witness such leadership, knowing that it reflects some of the same values that my great-grandmother dedicated her life to, and I personally aspire to. And so, on behalf of the entire Haub family, it is my pleasure to welcome Ambassador Rena and Kristina Maria Gjerde as the 2024 laureates of the Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy. You are the torchbearers of this vital work, and we are deeply inspired by your leadership. Congratulations.
Good evening, everyone. Oh, well done. My name is Smita Narula, and I'm the Haub Distinguished Professor of International Law at Haub Law School. I'm so proud to be a faculty member at the law school, which is home to the #1 environmental law program in the galaxy, as we've said. Thank you. Thank you. I'm amazed that hasn't come up yet. So we need to work on, you were saving, that's very kind of you, Dean Anderson. It's my honor also to be a member of the Haub Award jury. What an honor it is to celebrate the achievements of our distinguished laureates and to have this year's award bestowed by the great-granddaughter of Elisabeth Haub, who with her presence and in her actions affirms the Haub family's multi-generational commitment to environmental protection. With tonight's panel, we celebrate our laureates, and we also celebrate the triumph of environmental law and diplomacy that resulted in the adoption of an agreement that governs all marine areas beyond national jurisdiction, an area larger than all the world's continents combined. We celebrate these achievements in the presence of so many members of our community present in the room today and joining us online, including individuals who themselves have made pivotal contributions to the BBNJ process. Individuals such as Professor Simi Payne of Rutgers Law School, who as a member of IUCN's Ocean Law Specialist Group contributed significantly to the treaty negotiations, primarily focusing on environmental impact assessments and cross-cutting issues such as compliance and dispute settlement, and individuals such as Professor Hiroko Muraki Gottlieb, an adjunct professor at Haub Law, who also played a significant role in the negotiations as the representative for the ocean for the International Council of Environmental Law. She helped shape the discussion around the fair and equitable use of marine genetic resources and the enhancement of technology transfer and capacity building measures. The Haub Award has also previously recognized individuals who have committed their lives and careers to the protection of the sea. In 1996, the award was conferred on Singaporean jurist Tommy Koh, who was instrumental in negotiating the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Part 12 of UNCLOS provides a juridical foundation for BBNJ. I see a lot of head nods recognizing Tommy Koh's contributions. And then in 2007, Professor David Freestone was recognized for creatively leading the establishment of the Sargasso Sea Commission, a practical example of international cooperation to safeguard the biodiversity of the high seas, which also paved the way for marine protected areas under BBNJ. Professor Freestone has been at the forefront of ocean governance for over 4 decades. He is executive secretary of the Sargasso Sea Commission and visiting scholar and professorial lecturer at the George Washington University Law School in Washington, D.C. He's also a former deputy general counsel at the World Bank, where he also headed the International and Environmental Law Group. He has played a pivotal role in developing the legal frameworks for marine protected areas and has been intimately involved in the BBNJ negotiations since their inception. His extensive publications have become essential references in the field, and in 2021, his colleagues honored him with a collection of essays in an edited volume entitled Frontiers in International Environmental Law, Oceans and Climate Challenges. I'm happy to announce that all of these essays and related materials in this fest script honoring Professor Freestone are now available open access online. So I expect all students to go home and download all the chapters immediately. Today, he brings his expertise to our discussion on the new High Seas Treaty and its implications for the future of ocean governance. Please join me in welcoming to the panel Professor Freestone, Professor Gjerde, and Ambassador Lee. So we'll start off with a personal question. Everyone in this room, everyone we know, and generations to come stand to benefit from the BBNJ agreement because we know that all life on the planet is dependent on the health of our oceans. So I think it's safe to say that this is very personal to everyone here, but it's especially personal to each of you as you've had a profound role and dedicated years of your life and time and energy to shaping and ensuring the adoption of this agreement. So what I wanted to start with was just to bring you each back to that moment in March 2023 on the screen now, when Ambassador Lee announced the ship has reached the shore, a very emotional moment, no doubt. Can each of you tell us what that moment meant to you and what your hope is for the future of BBNJ?
Well, thank you for that simple question. That was, I would just say it was a huge sense of relief and comfort, knowing and acknowledging the dedication of the people in the room that were able to make this happen. That was a huge sense of gratitude and belief that together we truly can make important things for the sustainability and betterment of our planet last. But I'm also looking and acknowledging that all this is going to take all the goodwill of people in the room now and those of your students who are going to continue this legacy forward. We're not done. I think Rena, I'll leave it to Rena to say that we're just halfway there, and now the hard work of implementation comes forward. And I just like to acknowledge my colleague Nicola Clark, who's running the High Seas ABMT working group for the High Seas Alliance, that will be very involved in taking all this to the very important next steps. So thank you.
Well, I was thinking, how long more before I can get some sleep? But really, it was indeed an emotional moment. I think I was really privileged, and I think people here know that the last 40 hours or so inside that conference room 6, I told another group earlier this week, we're all trauma bonded through experiencing that, but really so inspiring to see countries all over the world being able to set aside their differences to work towards a common purpose. And I think this is the real BBNJ story. The story of how we can actually set aside our differences and work together. So in fact, this, it's thanks to warriors like Kristina and David for being persistent in getting us to where we were, but also for all those involved, the BBNJ family, for really, for really working together in order to get things done. And so really this award is actually in tribute to all of them.
So I have to admit I was in bed. I didn't actually go to that last session, but first thing in the morning, I could see all the live streaming of this amazing event. And let me make this was not a done deal, right? This was right to the last minute. It was an issue. 40 hours of negotiation is a way of wearing down the opposition to a number of major issues. We're just about to see the start of the PrepCom. They've got a lot on their plate. A lot of things are just shunted forward, right, in that last package. I think that's a bad thing, but it was an amazing accomplishment. And I think, that Rena Lee takes a major credit for this, because it was her in unfailing politeness and patience. I know that, because I've known her some time, patience was not quite as strong in sometimes as in others, but she really was amazing in ways she kept this process going. So I think it's an amazing accomplishment. It's an amazing accomplishment of the UN, really, through times of really serious global conflicts and issues, right? That we are able to pull together this overarching agreement of this kind. It's not perfect, what is, but it's incredibly good, and it's going to be a great legacy which we'll work with, and our thanks to Rena and also to Kristina, who was from the back of the room, because I was in the IUCN delegation, a real inspiration on many issues where, there was an easy path and there was a difficult path, but the difficult path was probably the right one. And she was the voice that pointed this out. Not always well received, but at the time, but certainly now. Thank you.
That sets up the next question I had quite well. Today is UN Day, which commemorates the day the UN Charter came into force. And the Secretary General of the UN in his UN Day statement said, since 1945, the UN has been the place for countries to unite behind global solutions to global problems. But as Professor Freestone and just intimated, ours is an era rife with conflict and with cynicism about the effectiveness of multilateral decision-making processes being able to solve global solutions. So I think given the background of that cynicism, the BBNJ agreement really affirms the UN system and the power of environmental diplomacy. Ambassador Lee, I wanted to ask you directly, you skillfully steered the complex negotiations to their historic conclusions. What lessons can we draw from these negotiations that we might apply to negotiations to come?
I think that, when you read the press, when you read stories about, this particular chapter of the BBNJ story, and Kristina is quite right. We merely finished a chapter and we're going to start a new chapter pretty soon in April next year with the preparatory commission. But in the stories you read, they'll tell you about how this was a 20-year journey. And indeed, it was a 20-year journey to get us to the agreement. But I think it's also important to remember that actually, I introduced the draft text of the treaty in the fall. I'm trying to use American terms because I come from a country where there are no seasons. In the fall of 2019, each of our sessions was 2 weeks long. In the fall of 2019, then came the pandemic, and we resumed in the spring of 2022. And then we had a meeting in the fall of 2022. And not this picture, but the picture you saw when the ship reached the shore was the spring of 2023. That is a total of 8 weeks. 8 weeks in which the countries, the observers, all came together to negotiate a complex treaty of over 70 articles spanning a wide range of areas. And I want to highlight, it's true it took 20 years to get to this point, but it also took us 8 weeks of negotiations to get the treaty done. And I think this is important for us to remember, because it's true we are in difficult times, and I don't mean to sound cavalier about it, but in difficult times, we can still get things done. So when there are proposals, don't say, oh no, it's going to take us 20 years. No, actually, if we put our minds to it, we can do it. So really credit to all the negotiators, because 8 weeks was all we took.
I think you're getting some insights as to why and how Ambassador Lee so successfully steered this. And I hope you've cleared your calendar, because we're going to ask you to take on many more negotiations to come. So that would be great. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I just like to highlight the importance of science and science diplomacy in this process. It was really initiated by a group of scientists who came to me and said they're bottom trawling our deep ocean corals that we're only starting to learn about. The fish they are taking, we've just learned, are 240 to 250 years old. This is not sustainable. Can we use legal tools to create high seas marine protected areas? And of course I said, oh, well, we'll look into that. And yes, of course. And at the same time, we need to ban deep sea bottom trawling, because it's not something that you really want anywhere, because it is so highly destructive. And in many ways, it was the scientists who brought these issues to the attention of conservationists such as myself, the tools that we had in place to actually go out and explore these previously unknown places, and that the scientists continued to attend these meetings via the Deep Ocean Stewardship Delegation, the Global Ocean Biodiversity Initiative delegations, that they were in the rooms to tell us about the threats of climate change on the ocean, why it's so important to create this global system for understanding how the impact of this activity is magnified by the impacts of deep ocean warming. So my hat's off to
If
them
I
too.
could come in on that.
Please.
That's the vision she has, and she had it right from the beginning, but not many other people did. If we start going back to the early days of the ad hoc, what was it, the informal ad hoc, occasional,
Working
for, et cetera,
Open-ended,
to study.
informal
Yeah, I
working
mean,
group.
this was not a message that everybody now thinks is an important one. That IUCN played a critical role, and Kristina in the front of that, in actually outlining the importance from an ecological point of view of some of these high seas systems. The reason we chose the Sargasso Sea is quite close to the US. It's right in the middle of the North Atlantic, and it's highly visible. I mean, it's got the biodiversity is very obvious, the floating Sargasso harbors, turtles, large numbers of large numbers of species. It's the only place in the world the anguillid eels spawn. I mean, we don't know why. So it's quite charismatic. Eels aren't very charismatic, but they are, oh yes, Simi's disagreeing. Well, I think they are now, but they get laughed at. So, but that was a message that we had to get over. We had a meeting here in 2008, looking at the ways in which we might move this forward. Kristina was one of the chairs. I co-chaired it with others as well. And that was a major, if you like, sort of scientific justification for taking action on these issues. It was a hard sell. A number of governments, including, somewhere not far from here, says we don't need a new treaty on this. We just need to enforce the existing ones. We kind of heard that before, haven't we? And that was a big dynamic. So it's great that we now look back and say, wasn't that a good idea? But it wasn't. That 20 years ago, it wasn't seen that way. So it's the visionaries like Kristina, I think, has been very important for us to. She pushed me as well, but it was her. She was the main driver for this.
And if I may, I think it's also important for us not to see the BBNJ treaty as an exception, that because we are in very challenging times, and it is true that we do need to pay attention to the issues, the challenges, including armed conflict and including climate change. We do. But we also need to not feed into the narrative that BBNJ was an exception in the times that we were. And I'll give you an example. We adopted the BBNJ agreement in June of 2023. And in May of 2024, I was involved in the negotiations to conclude a treaty on intellectual property, genetic resources, and associated traditional knowledge. And we also know that there are many other ongoing negotiations that speaks to the value that states place on international law and multilateralism. So they are difficult times, but we should maintain a positive attitude towards the creation, development, and implementation of international law.
Thank you, Ambassador Lee. I especially appreciate that call to elevate and uplift both the relevance and continuing impact of international environmental law and multilateral agreement and diplomacy, especially for all our students in the room of international environmental law that ask themselves that question many a time. I also appreciate, Professor Freestone, you bringing attention to the critical role that IUCN has played in this. We have students in the room also who are learning about this important organization, some of whom are drafting motions to be presented at the next World Conservation Congress. Professor Gjerde, is there anything else you wanted to add about specifically what IUCN's expertise contributed to this process?
Well, I'll try not to take the next 24 hours, but we had the delight of working with multiple arms of IUCN. I mean, starting with the Environmental Law Center in Bonn. They were the first to sort of introduce me to the German government, and we talked about the need for a high seas treaty. We sort of had the whole thing drafted. We looked at the gaps, we looked at the options, and we looked at potential text for an implementing agreement in 2006. We were maybe a little bit ahead of our time, but that was just with the International Environmental Law Center. That was along with an increasing number of people from the World Commission on Environmental Law. That was the World Commission on Protected Areas. In 2003, we developed a 10-year strategy for developing a global network of high seas MPAs. A little bit slower than that, but so it was the ability of IUCN to convene different players with different levels of expertise that was always a very useful umbrella. That was, we also had wonderful convening power. We organized a series of sort of seminars, workshops at the Picantico Center in upstate New York in Tarrytown. And this is sort of the the Rockefeller estate that was almost going to be the home of the United Nations. And it sort of became known. We'd had 2 seminars on marine genetic resources, sort of the more intractable issue, seminars on the impact of climate change on the ocean, and then one with Hiroko's help on sort of, okay, these are all the issues. How do we start to bring the heads of delegations together? And that included the Russians, the United States, and Japan. We actually made progress on multiple fronts, and it was sort of the bonding that you were able to do by convening these multiple workshops. So it was the creation of knowledge products that was sort of trying to create the vision of what is possible, looking at options for what might also be possible if you're feeling ambitious at the time, and having access to a world of global experts through the World Commission on Environmental Law, on protected areas, and then the delightful core team at IUCN Global Marine and Polar Program, now the Ocean Team, who sort of provided that anchor and lovely support and rationale. Kristina, you sure you really want to go to this 15th meeting this month in 15 different countries? So IUCN is a remarkable organization that has many interesting facets. It's not always easy, but because it is truly global in nature, it can offer a home for anybody with an idea and a commitment and the ability to bring others around you. So thanks.
Beautifully said. I was hoping now we could turn a little bit to the real substance of the agreement, and hoping that each of you could sort of walk us through how we should regard the interrelationships between the 4 main parts of the BBNJ agreement, namely area-based management tools, including marine protected areas, the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits of marine genetic resources, environmental impact assessments, and capacity building and the transfer of marine technology. How do we think about those individually, and how do they work together? And feel free to pick any piece of that you like.
Can I start? And yes, a difficult question. And those of you who were involved in the negotiation know that it was different work groups that produced the outcomes. There's Dan Bodansky, the US environmental lawyer, has written an article in the American Journal. He calls it 4 treaties in 1. And there's more truth in that than you would really believe. I mean, there isn't a lot of cross-referencing. We were asking about the principles. I heard, and I was in a meeting in China in the summer, and the Chinese delegation said, well, as far as we remember, what happened was we need to deal with the principles, so we just brought the principles from all the different sections and put them together, which is quite, and I think that's probably true. And none of them really worked through so some of them are still controversial. I see Simi smiling, and yeah, I mean, there's some issues still with this, but that's also a strength, and I'm going to hope I have a chance to say that. But let me just say this issue of the IUCN. IUCN is also a facilitative organization because it's the experts in it that work. I do actually remember one of these Picantico workshops. I was sitting next to the Argentinian delegation. It was at the end of 2010 or 2011, where really most developing countries weren't interested in ABMTs. They're saying this is EU, this is the Europeans who want to do this. What about the benefits to us from this, from marine genetic resources? So the concept of actually putting it together, as I remember, on a Sunday afternoon, kind of came together at that Pocantico workshop, and that's the 211 agreement, compromise. So, all this, it's the question of personalities as well, when many of these.
Oh, well, David just went, this was a package deal
Mhm.
from the very
Mhm.
beginning. That was, and that was in many ways the magic of it. And those of us with the luxury of sort of looking at some of the areas, but also looking back and looking out and trying to see how all these interconnected. I mean, it's easy to say now. But from the scientific perspective, you have institutions like the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution that are using environmental DNA tools to actually help to understand the mid-ocean water column, the ocean twilight zone. We can't explore and understand the ocean without bringing into bear the marine genetic resources that have become an accepted part of the scientific toolkit. But most developing countries don't have access to that. So if you can actually devise, large-scale regional strategic environmental assessments, it can help you figure out where you need your area-based management tools, where would be your core marine protected areas. You provide knowledge for baselines, future environmental impact assessments, and if you plan it right, you can engage the full suite of competences at the regional and national level that are both the institutional but also the scientific, as well as the sort of principal and international legal and international relations working forward. So I see it very much as a integrative whole that will only work if we continue to focus on all four elements as a wonderful unifying force.
At the start of the IGC, the Intergovernmental Conference process, I told everyone we know what it is we want to do. We want to conserve and sustainably use the biological diversity of the areas beyond national jurisdiction, which is not only the high seas, but also the deep sea bed. What we have to do is to figure out how we're going to do what we say we want to do and who's going to do that. So I guess the treaty, if you look at the treaty, and although they are seemingly different areas, the treaty is a treaty of how. It provides you with a series of mechanisms and processes to do the how of conservation and sustainable use. And that's how I would describe the treaty.
So we currently have 13 parties, 60 are needed for it to enter into force. But even before the treaty was adopted, scholars and advocates started turning their attention to implementation. So the question broadly, and I know many of you are working on this, Professor Freestone, you actually have a new co-edited publication in the works that provides a commentary, analysis, and assessment of the BBNJ agreement. Professor Gjerde, you've also written papers on implementation. The question, and this has already come up, the differing capacities and needs between developed and developing countries. The question is, what do you believe is needed to ensure the rapid, effective, and equitable implementation of the BBNJ, especially taking into account the differing capacities and needs of developed and developing countries?
Start? I mean, it's killer, right? I'm happy to start. Fools rush in. So, goodwill, I think. The famous phrase was, do not undermine, right, the competence of existing organizations. And that became a kind of mantra during most of the negotiations. What are we going to be able to do if we can't actually affect the ways that current things are done, which are not always done in a very good way? And I think that the final text of Article 5, which actually has collaboration and cooperation, is really the key goodwill issue, right? So I think it's it's put it into perspective of how this is going to happen. Now, I work with IMO, I work with a large number of, I work with ICAT. ICAT's a bit of a stretch, I have to say, but NAFO, the Northwest Atlantic Fisheries Organization, we're working with Seabed Authority. There's a real change in the secretariats about willingness to engage in this. They realize this is something they have to do. Their members are the same members who were negotiating, right? They may be different ministries, but the same governments. So the PrepCom will be looking at those. We may find that the representatives in PrepCom are again thinking, oh, well, I have to be careful about IMO because the person at the back of the room is my representative in IMO. Well, that's good. I mean, they basically, we resist coordination, right? I think we like cooperation. Coordination means somebody else does it to your direction. I think cooperation is a better word, right? Because it actually is collaboration. And I think that's where we can see that beginning to happen already. Some of the more recalcitrant member states will need pushing, I'm sure, but that's a matter of time. But I think as we work through the PrepCom, all those issues sort of come out. So.
You go ahead.
I mean, I think we've turned the chapter. Actually, in one of the other panels, somebody said, "Oh, so what happens now that the ship has reached the shore?" Which, by the way, is an in-joke in the IGC. What happens? I say, well, we've got to provision it so it can set sail again. That's basically what we have to do. And as we turn to implementation, and I wanted to pick up on something that David said, I think the negotiators, the delegations were concerned about future-proofing the agreement. And one of the mechanisms that we chose in order to future-proof the agreement was, it wasn't that we shunted decisions to the conference of the parties. It was giving the conference of the parties the flexibility in order that as circumstances change, as our knowledge of the high seas and the deep seabed increases, that we can adjust the details of the mechanisms and the processes. And I know that some here, maybe many here, will be involved in the next stage, the next chapter of the BBNJ story, which is working out the implementation details. And I think as we work the implementation details, and of course, we have to work towards ratification, entry into force as well. But as we work towards the implementation details, I hope that everyone remembers we don't have to get things perfect. We have to get things going.
Well said.
Yes, hard to compliment that, but I would say we at least have seen positive progress in terms of governments, the European Union, the Global Environment Facility, stepping up, and donors, philanthropists stepping up to actually put money on the table to assist with ratification, to assist with the development of early high seas MPA proposals, to assist with marine scientific research and exploration. So I think the institution building at the United Nations in the first PrepCom and in the series thereafter are going to be of critical importance, but at the same time are sort of the boots on the water that was actually sort of working through the future high seas MPA proposals, working through how is the marine genetic resource access and benefit sharing provisions, how are those going to work? How do we actually assess what capacity needs there are? We need some serious attention to these issues. And so it's encouraging to see that the funds that have been raised to go into these topics. But of course, I would always encourage more donors, national and international, to step up to the table, because these next few years are really going to be of critical importance.
So if there's anybody in the room who's in a position to to contribute, please do.
Could I add a comment?
Please.
I'm just examining an extremely good thesis, PhD thesis, which is looking at socio-ecosystem resilience from a legal point of view, right? We're used to that from IPCC. So IPCC has a methodology for that. And when you're looking at to make systems resilient, you need flexibility. So that's why I'm picking up the point. You need to have diverse information systems, and you need to have good information flows, and you actually have diverse decision-making
Mhm.
structures. So it comes back to this question of how we will make it work in an era of climate change. We don't know what's happening. So that was one of the questions you put up there. And I thought I was really impressed with, there was a piece that was done by Catherine Blanchard and Carol Duracell, Ben Botellier as well, was in marine policy, which looked at this idea of socio-ecosystem resilience. And the issues that it flags are the things that are in the agreement. So we have flexibility. There's a dynamism. We don't know how it's going to work, but there's a dynamism between the scientific technical body and the COP. There's going to be dynamism between all the rules have to be worked out, right? So there's flexibility there. Information and consultation is written all the way through it. So information systems, indigenous peoples' information systems, all those things. And of course, we've been bemoaning fragmented governance. That actually is a diverse system of decision making. So as long as they can collaborate, that's actually a benefit to system resilience, which is a legal system resilience as well. So that's a really positive part of the fact that I take the slap on the wrist of shunting these issues forward, but they're right, they have to be, but they will take a lot of time to settle, I'm sure.
But if I can just point out, that is the importance of the principles and approaches section, because fragmented governance only works when you have a common sense set of principles and approaches to guide all the decision-making units. And since we have sort of this array of global governance instruments, from climate change to the Convention on Biological Diversity and the BBNJ now, and the BBNJ talks about building climate resilience into all of your activities, into whether it's funding or marine protected area management tools, environmental impact assessments. So these sorts of principles then can inform states when they are taking decisions in other bodies. And hopefully you start to get a common and shared appreciation of the value of this interconnection between all the previously fragmented organizations.
So I'm happy to hear that climate change is now in the room. It's where my next question is going. And this is going to be a combined question. And my last one, because I know there are many people in the room who'd like to, and online, who have questions as well. And the question really is, how do you see the BBNJ agreement connecting to other multilateral environmental frameworks, both climate change, but also the Biodiversity Convention? And specifically, we know that under the Kunming-Montreal Framework for Biodiversity, states have agreed to protect 30% of the Earth by 2030. It's unimaginable that would happen without the establishment of marine protected areas in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And then just this year, in May, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, in its advisory opinion, made clear that oceans and atmosphere are interdependent and integral to the biosphere. So in what ways might the agreement also support international efforts to cope with climate change?
I mean, as I said, this is an agreement of the how we can establish marine protected areas, how environmental impact assessment should be done, how we access, utilize, and then subsequently share benefits from marine genetic resources, and of course capacity building and transfer of marine technologies as well. But overriding that is that coordination and collaboration. So really being able to pull the different systems together. And I want to suggest that actually one area in which we should focus capacity building is around national coordination, because it is national coordination that will drive greater cooperative decision making at the international level. Because in many countries, the different bodies are are under the responsibility of different agencies within that government, and then helping agencies build a certain degree of coordination in their approaches, I think would be very helpful. And since this is a this is a school where many students are studying environmental law. I want to suggest that the synergies process in the chemicals convention might be something that we want to look at. And also, I think really as we move into the prep com, a chance for us to be also creative in how we approach some of these questions.
No, I agree.
Okay. Well, I would just say, and some of the challenges coming up with climate change is the BB&J agreement will be very important in the context of marine carbon dioxide removal proposals and some of the solar radiation, such as marine cloud brightening proposals. These are activities that may take place within or beyond national jurisdiction or even on land, but at least the provisions of the BB&J agreement on environmental impact assessments stand as the current state of the art on notification, consultation, what the screening and scoping stages should contain. That was the responsibilities of states to ensure that they don't cause significant harm to the marine environment in the context of these proposals to sequester carbon dioxide in the deeper ocean. So I think the BB&J agreement will become critically important, but it's in many ways just a stopgap measure. We have the London Protocol that is also seeking to address some aspects of marine carbon dioxide removal, but it only has a very limited number of parties, 64, I believe, and it does not yet have that universal approach or application, but it does apply within national jurisdiction. So we need to find a way to get these two organizations, conventions, to work together and make sure that we have a fit for purpose regime as the marine carbon dioxide proposals for research advance into the field and start to look more and more like commercial activities to sell carbon credits, which then sort of looks very much like deployment. Where's the equity in consultations? Who's going to be benefiting and who loses?
Could I also raise
importance.
a point about it? You mentioned the ITLOS case. I'm on the COSIS Committee of Legal Experts. So we've been over that really carefully. They've exceeded our wildest dreams. But there's provisions on the importance of environmental impact assessment, that's important, protected areas, critical habitats, all the buttons that we're interested in those are obligations to protect the marine environment under Part 12 of the Law of the Sea Convention. So that's really, it's there. This is just a modality for doing it, right?
Well, thank you all so much. It's time to, and I just want to say, I also appreciate the mention of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous peoples' rights, and the mention of who stands to benefit and who will be disadvantaged or be on the losing end of the kinds of schemes that are come up with and the solutions that are come up with at the intersection of ocean conservation and climate change. All right, I now turn it to our audience for questions. The plan is to take a few questions at a time so we can get as many questions in as possible. I'll ask that you introduce yourself before the question, and then we'll turn to questions that might be coming in online. Yes, over here. There's a microphone coming to you as this is being recorded.
Hi, good evening. My name is Andrea Galassi, double graduate from BASE, LLM Global Environmental Law with Professor Narula, 2020 actually, pandemics in the middle, and then a Master Environmental Science and Policy last year from BASE, Dyson College. I made my last thesis in Indigenous communities, traditional knowledge, and the BB&J agreement. So first of all, thank you for an insightful panel and with direction of Professor Narula and questions that are very, very interesting, especially for me, my background as part of the National Commission on the Outer Limits of the Continental Shelf. I work with Frida Armas, many of you may know her. And I have my interests are now in how can we are from our position move forward with we all know what the agreement and the High Seas Treaty speak about indigenous communities and traditional knowledge. But from your experience, I would like to ask you, what are the suggestions that we as environmental law students, environmental law graduates, and environmental law professionals can take a step in the implementation of the agreement and the work with indigenous community and traditional knowledge? Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Lovely to see you again. We'll take a couple of more questions in this round.
Hi, my name's Jonathan Schwer. I'm a student at the Pace Law School in White Plains, and I have a question pertaining to something you said somewhat earlier in the panel discussion. You mentioned how we live in a very volatile time politically and geopolitically abroad, and and how that could potentially impact. My question pertains to how that could impact the working of these international organizations. Like global instability and volatility, impact these global, bodies and international and multinational bodies in the field of environmental law, and whether maybe the field of environmental law, when it comes and you have these conflicts in the world, and there are a lot of like potential environmental externalities or impacts caused by these issues. I'm wondering if you could maybe just a word you might have about how international environmental law could maybe be applied to the laws of war, or a law in international armed conflict. Those are two separate questions, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else before we turn back? No? There was someone over. Yes, Bridget. Yep.
Hi, my name is Bridget Molnar. I'm also a student at the Elisabeth Haub School of Law. My question is similar to the first, but what are some hopes and, let's say, dreams of how you'd like the next generation to take this agreement and the major win that this UN has had to the next steps? How do we advance on these major wins and continue to move forward?
Thank you.
I mean, I guess when I started the IGC process, I asked myself, what do we want to make of this process, apart from getting an agreement? What we want to make of this process. And one of the things, and maybe also to address the question around the volatile world, was really being able to demonstrate, being able to have those that were involved in the process really viscerally experience what it means to work together, what it means to come together and to work together. And so, to build that platform for cooperation amongst ourselves, so that even though we live in a volatile world, that there are still means for us to work together. And part of the reason was because when we started the process, and the way the UN conference rooms work is you sit in front and then the room slides up, and looking up into the room, I saw so many young people in the room. And it was about how do they take this forwards, not just this process, but in the future when they have to deal with really the challenges and the difficult issues, that they remember. I always used to go out amongst the negotiators and I say, make sure you have fun, because that's what's important, and that they remember that we can do it again because we've done it once before.
All those nights at the karaoke bars do start to wear one out.
Yes.
But practice your singing and your dancing. But in terms of practical skills, I see a huge need for experts in negotiation and facilitation, mediation. That was because we are in a world of divergent interests, that we really need people who will be able to go out to the field, one, to help negotiate future high seas marine protected areas, but working in the room, that was in the prep comms as well as the conference of parties when these happen, is really trying to understand what are the positions, what are the interests, and what are the real core concerns that governments are trying to express without saying as much. So your international relations skills will be as important as the legal skills, as important as the people skills. So trying to foster all three of those at the same time is really where I would take my hats off to all of you.
Yeah, I've got a perspective from a project that's actually trying to do this, right? And the bars are really high. If you look at Article 19, which is a proposal for a ABMT, you have to put forward the proposal, has to meet the criteria, which are established. Those are the same as for EBSAs and for other areas. But you also have to do wide stakeholder consultation. And we don't know what will come out of those, right? We actually hired a private sector consultancy to actually do that work for us on the basis that people will talk better to them than maybe to us, right? And I think that's good practice. It's working really well. But what will come out of that from employment to Indigenous peoples is difficult if you're 200 miles from, it's in the Pacific, I think, particularly where that's going to be more of an issue. And they were the ones who most vociferously were putting that forward. And then, you know, the best science available is, we're talking about areas 200 miles from the shore. This science is very patchy, even for an area that's been fairly heavily studied like the North Atlantic. That's very patchy. So the bar is quite high. So all these skills which Kristina and Rena were talking about, we're going to have to use in putting these proposals forward. You do all your consultations, and then the Secretariat double guesses you and sends them all around again. So have you actually talked to all the organizations? Have you actually talked to Indigenous? So they send them all out, right? So that's going to take longer than we perhaps envisaged, but it's it's going to be a protracted process, but we'll have to be on our, you can't cheat. It's going to be really quite important that it's done in this way. And what we'll be doing is educating a whole new generation, if you like, of environmental lawyers, scientists who are actually going to be putting forward these proposals. So that's good.
Well, I've officially listed negotiation skills and karaoke singing as critical skills for all environmental law students. I also would be remiss not to respond to Jonathan's question by sharing that just last year, the Haub Award was awarded to Maria Leto and Mari Jakobsen for their critical role as special rapporteurs with the International Law Commission, which adopted the draft principles on protection of the environment in relation to armed conflict. So international law is bringing its attention to the interconnectivity between conflict and the environment. That video is of that panel is on our website. So might be a place for you to learn more about those issues, and a very important question indeed.
And you may also wish to speak with Professor Simi Payne in the
Yes.
back of the room right now, who's very active in the Ukraine issues of environmental harm to the ocean, and to the marine
Can I
environment.
just raise another point, which is about the dynamics of the global system? Those who follow Camelot will know that there was one country particularly that's been a problem in the designation of marine protected areas in Camelot, right? The same one was absolutely obstructive in the early days of BBNJ. So I'm just writing the conclusions now. So we're pulling together all the unique features. And one of them is the opt-out procedure, but also majority voting. Consensus has become knee-jerk, but it doesn't always work if you have problems. And so I think that the idea of being able to vote on these things with an opt-out provision, but the opt-out provision is pretty tightly prescribed, which is clever. So those are, that reflects, if you like, the reality of there are going to be some situations where you just cannot get everybody to agree.
Thank you. I wanted to bring our online audience into the room, and I think we have some questions.
Yes, distinguished panelists, good evening. First, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Jacob Hauser, and I'm just going to introduce our online questionnaires. First, I want to say what a great fan I am of the work that you've done, and to thank you for your unifying leadership. I was 10 years in the U.S. Coast Guard, gone out to sea in person, and I've helped enforce high seas drift net fisheries, or rather the ban on them. I have helped to be part of cleaning up a lot of the ocean, and I've seen that it is far, far, far too big a job for any one nation to do. And we all need to be doing a lot more. So thank you for your work. All right, to begin, we have a question from Nasran Sadeki and a Professor Lee. What was the most challenging issue during the BBNJ conference? An issue that you thought could not be agreed upon. Also from a Haub Law student, Harrison Bench in Seattle right now. As Professor Narula remarked, all life on Earth is dependent upon the health of our oceans, not just coastal areas. But with that being said, how are the perspectives and interests of landlocked states included in the treaty negotiation? And one more, with growing industrial interests and activity at intersections of the UN Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf and the International Seabed Authority, how does the panel recommend that reformers, scientists, lawyers, and diplomats leverage and use the provisions of the BBNJ to help protect life on the high seas and in the area now?
Thank you.
I can start with
I have to leave now.
Those are hefty questions. I'll start with the last one and leave the tough ones to the other two. I think we have both the BBNJ agreement, but we also have the mother agreement, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which talks about states have the obligation to protect and preserve the marine environment. They also have under Part 11 is the obligation to ensure the effective protection of the marine environment from the harmful effects of seabed mining. And I think these are very powerful provisions that the BBNJ agreement now amplifies and provides the procedural mechanisms as well as more updated principles and approaches to implementing these core obligations. So I think it's a question of addressing the national level incoherence, often exists within governments when they send their agencies, different agencies to the international meeting, to the Coast Guard, to the International Maritime Organization, and then the Bureau for Minerals to the International Seabed Authority. It's almost an executive level function that we need to start bringing governments together to understand their own core responsibilities, which is also where you international environmental lawyers will be critically important, is reminding governments of what it is they have already signed up to. And just to get to the question we had about Indigenous peoples and their roles in the BBNJ agreement, one could dream about say, high seas MPA proposal being led by an Indigenous community that was, for example, a navigation route of critical importance that may also be used by migratory species of importance, salmon, whales, sea turtles. So you would get both the biological and the cultural diversity and cultural heritage, and looking also at some of the intangible cultural heritage that we need to find a way of honoring as well. So that would be a very exciting proposal to be part of. So thanks.
It's a tough question. That was the point. 3 tough questions, actually. Again, look at the ITLOS case. I mean, the ITLOS judgment goes all over the whole, it looks at virtually the whole panoply. We asked, what are the legal rights and duties, the duties of states under? And they really went to town. So if we can show that deep sea ecosystems, which are going to be mined, have actually got important species, which are, we need to preserve, but does it change the ball game? I think I was at the UN over lunchtime, and somebody was making the point that the private sector doesn't act in isolation. The private sector's need, we have a judgment of the Seabed Tribunal in 2010, they have to act under the authorization of a government, right? And if they do things that are inappropriate, I use that as a non-judgmental term, the government's responsible as well. That was what little Nauru was worried about, right? So the responsibility applies. It applies also to the registers of vessels that are not complying with rules for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a lot of work to be done still. My committee is very active, and we're waiting to see the results of the ICJ judgment. But there's a lot of future litigation there, which will be quite interesting, I think, on some of these issues. So, good one, good question.
I think that in terms of, you're talking about the industrial interests, I do think that it is important to involve as many stakeholders as possible, because the industrial interest, as we put it, is actually where many of your innovations that will actually, you want a quieter ship, where you want a cleaner fuel, that's going to come from industry. And I think one of the things that maybe is a milestone in the BBNJ treaties. First of all, that the participation of stakeholders in many of the processes. And actually, if you look at the draft, and I was quite deliberate about setting out the different stakeholders and their different contributions to the processes, and you will see indigenous peoples and local communities mention them precisely to give them a voice as well. But in terms of the process, really, as far as possible, although I think the gentleman and the lady on my either side will disagree with me, but as far as possible, I did try to be open in terms of the negotiations themselves. And so the question about landlocked states, I think certainly landlocked developing states participated quite actively actually landlocked states in general, but the landlocked developing states organized themselves into a group, and they participated quite actively as well in the treaty. And in terms of the interrelationship, I think one thing you'll find in the treaty is that although it's a treaty under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, it actually introduces a lot of principles, concepts, and I guess institutions that we are more familiar with in multilateral environmental agreements. So that melding of I guess two kind of different areas, the introduction of the precautionary principle or the precautionary approach, the introduction of the ecosystem approach. I think all these will help to contribute to a more coherent way of doing it. I mean, there was a question about what was the most challenging issue. Actually, all the issues were challenging. And they were challenging because our mandate was to approach it in a package. If you look at the mandate of the Intergovernmental Conference, it already set out the package approach, meaning to say one couldn't go without the other. And so that made all the issues challenging. But I had faith in everybody, and I didn't think that we would never get anywhere. So
Well, that seems like a rousing note on which to end. In the face of challenge, carry on and move forward. Before I offer a couple of closing remarks, please join me in thanking this incredible panel and celebrating these laureates.
Of course. Oh, I would just like to bring this all together. David Freestone, in his 2007 speech, or at least his article that he wrote from his Haub Prize, was on principles for high seas governance. And that stemmed from a request from IUCN for we need, sort of to collect the best principles from international environmental law, international climate law, and let's start thinking through what do these principles actually mean and how do you put them into a single instrument to try to unify their application. And so I thank the Haub Law School for bringing David Freestone to this task. And we used that many, many different times.
Wow.
That was, so thank you very much.
What a lovely full circle moment. Thank you. So before just to conclude, I wanted to offer thanks to everyone involved in organizing this evening's event. Rachel Silva, who's still busy in the back organizing, for all your efforts, and so many others also for the entire event staff and crew that fed and nourished us today and that set us up here, and everybody involved in the Haub Award, including the jury members, all of our presenters. As we conclude tonight's remarkable discussion, I'm really struck by the fact that how the BBNJ agreement represents more than just a legal framework. It embodies our collective recognition that the ocean connects us all, transcending national boundaries and transcending generations. What we've heard from our distinguished panelists tonight, I think really illustrates how environmental diplomacy, when guided by science and sustained by dedication and brought together with joy and love of the oceans and of this work, then we really can achieve what many thought impossible. The journey from negotiation to implementation lies ahead, but we move forward with renewed hope. And as Mary Lee reminds us with her remarks today, environmental protection is a legacy we pass on. BBNJ agreement is our generation's commitment to the future, our pledge to keep our high seas vibrant and protected for generations to come. But in the faces of our students and all our alums tonight, I see the next generation of ocean advocates who will carry this work forward. Thank you for all for being part of this celebration of our extraordinary 2024 laureates of environmental law and diplomacy, and most importantly, of hope in action. Good evening to you all. Thank you.